So hello, I'm Tracy Lorenz. I'm CEO and President of Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Welcome to a webinar. We wanted to talk today about managing your career through COVID-19. What you'll see is we have students as well as alumni on here with us. We're privileged and honored to have Alice Cheng on with us from the Culinary Agents. It's a professional networking and job marketing website. So for all those that are on our alumni network site, Culinary Agents is our job board for that. She spent 13 years working at IBM, helping companies apply technology to solve business problems before she started and co-founded Culinary Agents. She brings her experience into the hospitality and culinary industry to solve inefficiencies and gaps around talent sourcing and career development. And she is passionate about helping people build careers. She takes on leadership roles and mentoring across all industries with the focus on helping all of you guys get jobs and keep jobs. And so we're excited and honored to have her here. So Alice, why don't you talk a little bit about Culinary Agents and its relationship that you have with us and how all these folks work with you guys?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and get a chance to talk to all of you. For those of you who aren't familiar with Culinary Agents, it's dedicated to basically making it as easy as possible for all of you to find and discover opportunities, jobs, and connect directly with employers. With Escoffier schools, we actually partnered by making sure that all the jobs that are posted on our site are automatically distributed to your alumni portal, which I know students also have access to. And so again, making it as easy as possible. And just to give you an idea, we support about 26,000 hospitality businesses across the US, over 86% of all Michelin rated restaurants, almost all of James Beard awarded restaurants, and then also really popular, just local spots, places. Everybody knows that the restaurant industry is really the foundation of communities and cities and culture and all these great things. And we just want to make it easy for all of you to find great jobs, develop your career, and put that wonderful education to work.
So we love Culinary Agents because it focuses solely on our industry. So you have like this focused area of all these opportunities. And so the one thing we wanted to do is we wanted to take a step back and just kind of give you guys some stats. And so the great thing about Culinary Agents is they have a ton of data on the jobs available right now. And I know that the headlines have been pretty scary. So we just wanted to give you guys some perspective. So pre-COVID, we have about 15.6 million jobs in the industry for this year. During COVID, we think we lost about 7 million of those jobs, but just the last 2 months alone, so for May and June, we've had about 3 million of those jobs recover from the industry. And so while this only marks the beginning of the recovery, we're really encouraged about what we're seeing in the marketplace and how people are adding jobs. And so we're excited to have Alice here to help us answer some of those questions that you guys have already sent up and help our students and alumni manage their career through COVID. So how we're going to do this, we have already some questions already prepared and that were sent up. We'll go ahead and start asking those questions to Alice. And then if you guys want to go ahead again and ask any questions, put it in the chat pod. Sarah will be managing that and then she'll send that up to us. All right. All right. So we're going to start with the first one. So we just talked about a little bit of some of the job stats initially lost and then the recent comeback. Knowing that Culinary Agents has significant data on the industry and recently conducted a survey on the industry, how has that landscape changed and what have you seen post-COVID or during COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, and the caveat being, I totally recognize that everyone is in their own, their own place and time with their careers and dealing with, I'm sure, just so many different aspects of what's going on. So bear with me as I give kind of high level answers and then obviously we can dive in deeper. You know, I think on the positive side, what we've seen is no doubt businesses had to really take a step back and restructure, re-look at how they're going to survive throughout this. What we're seeing with the jobs coming back is that a lot of businesses are in their rebuild process approaching things differently, which then opens up a lot of different opportunities. I think, you know, historically, if businesses were in certain categories like fine dining, throughout this time, we saw them really look at how do I continue to deliver my experience to guests, you know, and what should we do in order to do that? And what's come of that is just all these new opportunities that have emerged. And what we're seeing now as they're starting to rebuild is really thoughtful approach from the business side of, well, who do we need on our team now? Who will we need in a couple of weeks? And how can we plan that in a more strategic way?
So with that survey, some of the concerns came out from the workers. So how do you see, like, what were those concerns that kind of came up in the survey? And then how do you see those restaurants kind of responding to the concerns that our students and alumni would have when they enter or re-enter back into the workforce?
Yeah, and that's actually the main purpose of the survey, was actually to compile some information about what's really going on the talent side. Because what happened right away was, rightfully so, businesses really kicking into gear of how do we, you know, save our industry, how do we reboot our businesses, et cetera. But then when they started looking at how do we rebuild, there were a lot of hypotheses about being able to hire back their furloughed and laid off employees, but then also being able to attract new talent. And so we at Culinary Agents said, you know what, let's do a quick survey of talent so we can actually compile information to help businesses better prepare to hire the right folks. And so a couple of the concerns that we found were, you know, of course, safety, personal safety and well-being was at the top of the list for both front of house and back of house. Again, this is information, this is feedback from talent. We surveyed hundreds of thousands of folks, and we had a couple thousand responses. And number two, for back of house, was finding a job and having financial security. For front of house, finding a job was less of a concern. And we found that to be actually pretty interesting. And diving deeper into it, we found out that one of the things that businesses were doing were not making their positions readily available to be found right away because of the unknown and because they were still planning on what resources they would need. And so we really spent a lot of time bridging that gap to make sure that businesses understand, you know, kind of the Google golden rule: if you can't be found, you don't exist, right? And then on top of that, making sure that the opportunities that were available were distributed and made available to the audiences that were out there looking for opportunities.
And so particularly, I think this audience is more of the back of the house. So it's interesting when you say the personal safety and well-being, and it's one of the reasons why we put this webinar together, because both Alice and I started hearing a lot about what restaurateurs were doing and then what patrons would do as they re-enter the restaurants, but we weren't hearing a lot about what you needed to do as an employee going back into the restaurants. And so there's a lot of great statistics out there, data that supports that these restaurants post-COVID are going to be so much of a better culture, working place. They're very well prepared and are making changes that are necessary. And what you're seeing and what we are seeing is the best are going to rise to the top. And perhaps maybe the not so great restaurants or the not so great opportunities are not necessarily going to be able to reopen during, post-COVID. So I think it's while on the surface may look bad, we think it's actually a positive thing for our overall industry of how some of these restaurants are kind of reemerging. So the other thing that we were talking about earlier is you heard Alice say the broad reach that Culinary Agents have. The fact that they work with most, if not 80% of the Michelin star restaurants in the United States, a variety of other restaurants. Can you just give our students and alumni a perspective on just the quantity? I talked a little bit about job stats in the beginning, but really right now, if they wanted to go and look for a part-time job while they're going to school, we're obviously working with some that are approaching their externship, and then obviously alumni that are out in the market and they have lifelong career services with the Escoffier. They could come back in. What are some of the jobs, and can you give some perspective on the openings that you guys have available on Culinary Agents right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I also want to highlight is not only do we offer an easy way for businesses to post jobs, but we actually built tools specifically for all of you to be able to be proactive and find the employer that you want to get in front of and drop a digital resume off to them, even if they're not actively hiring. And I'll get back to that because I think at this point right now, it's even more strategic for you to take advantage of that because businesses are still thinking about their hiring strategy and who they're going to be, who they need and what skills they're looking for. But to answer your question, Tracy, right now at any given point, we have upwards of 6,000 jobs a month on our site that are active. And given the past couple of months, we have reduced that number pretty significantly for various reasons, mainly because most businesses were closed. But in the past couple of weeks, we've seen those numbers rise back up. So at this very moment, back of house positions really range between 700 or so jobs right now on the site across the US. And again, I say that as actual posts that are on the site, but not necessarily how many openings, because businesses will post one line cook or pastry cook or prep cook position, but really they're hiring 3, 4, 5, 7, depending on what their timing looks like. And then in addition to that, if you see an employer that you really want to get in front of, this is actually a really great time to be proactive and to highlight in your cover letter, why they should consider you or why you want to work there. And then we literally call the feature, I want to work here. And it's an easy, free way for you to be proactive.
And so to further what Alice was saying, we're very well positioned because you guys are skilled. You either have already experience within the industry or you're getting that experience through going to school. So another thing I think that we're seeing is that, pre-COVID and with the trends in the openings, you really didn't, sometimes you could get a job, but it would take you a long time to get that career trajectory. We now will see that because you guys have skills, you'll be probably getting jobs ahead of others that perhaps are not skilled if you have the passion, the drive, and the wherewithal. And so I think with Alice and her ideas in terms of being proactive, having a digital resume, those are things that we need to consider. And I know that our career services department, led by Patricia, will work with you guys personally to help kind of build your portfolio, prepare you for those interviews, because that's going to be very important. And that's one of the other things we love to say about the Escoffier opportunity is that we're preparing you guys with more of the skills beyond just the cooking skills. It's about how you present yourself, the communication skills, which are really important. So kind of leading into that, Alice, what have you guys have seen different with the employers of expectations now of the workers, maybe that they maybe were less lenient or less expecting pre-COVID, but then now are expecting post-COVID based on the job market?
Yeah, I think, what we're seeing, it's kind of early stages of looking at some trends. We do see some employers as they're looking at, depending on where they're located, their rollout plans, because everything is phased. The mid-level, entry-level positions for back of house are in high demand, because, well, for various reasons, including the fact that even if in the outdoor dining or the indoor dining is at reduced capacity, a lot of folks have throughout this time built up their delivery and their takeout and their to-go offerings. So those positions for back of house we've seen pretty consistently going up and up. And the reality is that businesses are chomping at the bit to get in front of all of you, right? The questions that they ask me are like, how can we position ourselves as the employer that they want to work for, right? Which is absolutely, I think it's absolutely something that both sides need to continue to focus on, right? And so I think, what reality that is happening is they are looking for all of you, for folks who not only have the baseline skills, some experience to the extent of whether you're entry level and you have experience from your education, or you're working and you have experience from there and you had the education prior to that. We hear a lot now upskilling and cross-skilling, and that can be, in the context of an employer looking at somebody who also might be able to do some light pastry because they can't bring on a full-time pastry person right now. You know, that just really differentiates everybody from somebody else. And those things are what are also standing out right now.
So I want to boast a little bit about Culinary Agents and your connections into these, 86% of the Michelin star restaurants. But we recently were fortunate to have Thomas Keller be our graduate speaker at our most recent ceremony a few weeks ago for our Boulder campus, and he'll be speaking for our Austin graduates as well in the upcoming ceremony. But Culinary Agents exclusively works with Thomas Keller Restaurant Group to manage all of their technology to their resumes and their job leads applicants and that whole process. And so there's a whole technology system around it that Alice and her team have built. And so it's pretty amazing when I look at all of the restaurants that you work with in the restaurant groups and kind of like who we aspire to work with and work for is pretty cool. The other thing that we would want to go into is, I know we've been talking a little bit about kind of the biggest piece of advice. So, we talked about what are the kind of the 3 takeaways that these folks can take away from this webinar of like, what can I do today? I'm going to school, or I'm already in the market and I'm an alumni, I already have experience. So what can they do right now to get themselves ready? In addition to working with, our career services professionals who can support that whole process as well. But what type of advice would you give them entering or advancing in the market right now?
Yeah, I love this question. I always say the number one thing you can do right now is really take a step back and ask yourself, what do you want to do? And I know it sounds silly, but I think what we've seen with the trend and the evolution of the industry, pre-COVID and, during, is that talent, there are more and more opportunities that are going to continue to evolve. You all are very well positioned to essentially get whatever job you want. The question is what job do you want, right? And at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is, apply to positions or with employers that you haven't really, thought about, is this the right employer for me? What is the most important thing for me right now? If it's career advancement in a particular area, great. Who are the leaders in that particular area that you just absolutely want to connect with and work for? If it's financial security or health insurance or benefits, okay, who are the employers that are boasting that as a great reason to work for them? And as I mentioned before, employers are trying to set themselves apart from each other because, they're trying to sell their jobs essentially to you, right? And at the end of the day, if you take the time to really, understand, what's most important right now to you, if it's safety, if it's financial, and then look at which employers are actually doing those things really well. I think a lot of what follows that will be very natural. Like, you'll be able to interview and answer questions differently. You will research differently because you'll be basically building the case for yourself as to why you want to work for this employer. And those questions will naturally get answered when you're talking to them.
I know we were also talking about just like perhaps while doing that process, that self-reflection and identification of what I want to do, who I want to work for. I know we also talked a little bit about how to expand that, to expand your horizons, keep your open mind. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, of maybe focusing, and other things than just the independent restaurants or maybe the smaller restaurants or the restaurant chains, but then also going with some other, like other opportunities in healthcare, perhaps, and long-term care facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most exciting things about what you all have ahead of you and what you're doing right now is that this industry has so many career paths, creative career paths that we have actually seen and have documented in a leadership series on our site. And what that means is, we work with restaurants, hotels, fine dining to fast casual, hotels, boutique hotels, cruise liners, food service, etc. And throughout this process, we realized a couple things. One is employers are all tapping into the same talent pool. You know, folks are trying to figure out, how do I make it really interesting and exciting for folks to work at stadiums or on a cruise liner or at a fine dining 3 Michelin star restaurant. And so one of the things that is very, very exciting and real is looking at your career path from when you're looking at what do you want to do, what's most important. I think you will see that the foundation of skills that you have can be transferred and applied to so many other aspects of the hospitality industry as a whole. And with that lens, I think with that lens and the, you know, what is most important and who are the employers that actually fit the mold that you're creating for yourself, I think you'll target your search in a way that you know, will be much more expansive.
Well, and I think that that's a great idea, because they can work with their career services department or their assistant at the same time, kind of going through that self-reflection while still doing what they're doing if they're either in school or if they're in transition at this point in time, either furloughed or looking for a change. Now I've gotten some questions from the group, so I'm going to go ahead and throw a couple of those out there. So I think this goes back to when we were talking about kind of the fears from the talent survey that came out and talked about sanitation and personal safety and well-being. And so one of the participants asked, how do they go about finding out what their employer is doing as it relates to safety and their well-being as they go back to work? You know, how do they find out those guidelines?
Yeah. So as far as there are public, and we'll circulate, you know, some resources after this, so you'll have, there are public listings at CDC and OSHA website on what the high level requirements are. But specific employers are now creating their own playbooks and putting them on their websites to educate and quite frankly promote both to their guests and their employees. What are the standards that they've put in place and the precautions? How are they going to you know, ensure the safety, and what are they doing now differently than they were doing before? If it's not publicly shared on their website, it should absolutely be one of your questions, if that's one of your main concerns. A very fair question to be asking employers, you know, what are the safety standards that you have in place and are enforcing? How are you enforcing those? Can I see them? You know, most, if not all employers have updated their training materials, have really put a lot of thought to how do I protect my employees and my guests.
And I additionally, I sit on a board with one of the state, you know, under the National Restaurant Association. And to your point, they're requiring all of their members, they're suggesting all of the restaurants have it even posted as like almost a promise. Here's what we're doing to keep not only our employees, but also our patrons safe. And so it's a shared accountability. And so I would also agree that that should be visible. If it's not available to you, I would definitely go ahead and ask, because it would make sense it would be at this point. So we have another question that I think kind of further goes into COVID and the opportunities perhaps during the disruption. And the person is asking, are you seeing a need for providing sanitation and safety services as a consulting as a business? So as we've seen, restaurants don't look like the way that they used to look like. Service doesn't look like the way it used to look like. So someone is asking a very great question about, is there an opportunity to provide that as a consulting service? And would you see that as an opportunity?
Absolutely is an opportunity overall, in-house and as a consulting. We're already seeing some of the larger businesses are actually identifying and hiring specifically new kind of sanitation roles or sanitation supervisor or folks like that. So new roles are being created. So that's the first thing. A second thing is if there isn't a new role that's being created, there are, for example, Boca Restaurant Group in Chicago, who has, you know, Girl and the Goat and you know, 20 restaurants in their portfolio. They actually created like a safety council, which is comprised of a couple of leaders from different restaurants and different positions in their group as well. So as far as cross-skilling, upskilling, having those skills is absolutely an additional benefit. I do see, since the question specifically was consulting, I do see businesses who are not going to hire specific people or are not big enough to have dedicated resources will be looking for credible third-party folks to make sure that they are following the guidelines and standards, et cetera.
So this one is not a COVID-related question. The person is just asking, is there an advantage to have speaking other languages such as Spanish? Are you seeing that on your, like when the skills required to work in the kitchens, is that an advantage that they would have over someone else?
Multilingual, especially Spanish for back of house, is an added benefit, not just for working in kitchen, but we see it with office positions as well. For those of you who might be interested in different aspects. It absolutely is worth highlighting. And we do see that as something that employers do value.
And the other thing that came up is just about daily resources. So I know Patricia had posted the alumni link, and you can post it again because I don't know if it got pushed in the comments. But so we're always putting blog posts up on our escoffier.edu website. I know you can go into the alumni portal, but Alice, I know you guys, Culinary Agents, has a ton of content. So if you had to suggest some daily, like they get up in the morning, they go through their news feed and they add it to their news feed, what would be a great thing to kind of keep up to date on the industry that would be good for them to refer to?
Yeah, I think there continues to be great content that's produced from, I would say Eater, Grub Street, some of these publications that kind of do a mix of consumer and industry. Of course, for those of you who use Instagram or other forms of social media following certain people or businesses, we've seen more and more businesses as well as leaders use Instagram and other social media forms as a way to communicate with the broader audience and update and be transparent. There are obviously a lot of things going on right now, and so I think staying tuned with, especially from a job standpoint, once you decide, narrow down your search, or even down to where do you want to live and where do you want to work, because there's been a lot of movement through this time. I would say you can pay close attention to what's happening in the reopening timeline for that particular city, because things are varying by state, by city, by county, et cetera. So between those types of things, as far as like up-to-date information, you can set up your Google alerts with some keywords and stuff like that. But that's what I find really helpful.
Yeah, I always pull up Eater because I know it's like kind of local to the Chicago area, and so it's just keeping me up to date on what's going on locally in Chicago. And so I know you mentioned that one. That was a good one. Yeah. So a question just came back of like in terms of the different jobs, what category do you think might come back the fastest? And I know again we were throwing out some of the job stats and we were looking at the past 2 months, and it was eating and drinking establishments, but what areas do you think, and what are you seeing coming back in terms of new jobs?
Oh, you mean like restaurants versus?
Yeah, just yeah. I guess within I think this question, it says what category, so I assume it's like which category within, whether it's maybe hospitality, maybe it's independent restaurants, maybe it's perhaps healthcare, like where are the culinary or hospitality jobs do you think are going to come back the fastest, or what are you seeing?
What we're seeing is on the restaurant side, definitely restaurants that are in more of the upscale casual or businesses who have evolved their perhaps fine dining operation to include delivery, takeaway, any restaurant that offers a different revenue stream, I'll call it, some other aspect of their business that is in addition to dining, indoor dining. So that's one area. We do see from a sports service standpoint, because of the timing and the scheduling for professional sports and the openings for stadiums and much larger kind of crowded gatherings, those positions are coming back a little slower, because if the if people are not allowed in the stadiums to watch the sports events, or if the sports events aren't happening, then those positions are, you know, not needed at this time. They will come back eventually. Cruise liners have, you know, a lot of different challenges, as you can imagine. So, you know, what we've seen so far is really in that independent restaurant, you know, area, as well as hotels that are starting to open at, you know, reduced capacity, focusing on their food and beverage operation.
One thing that we had been talking about offline was the National Restaurant Association and some of the trends that they had identified for the next decade. So they basically put out a 2020 report pre-COVID that talked about like the 10 top trends for the next decade. And 5 of those top 10 trends related to go, and not fast casual, but, you know, taking really nice fine dining restaurants and what patrons would expect for carry out and delivery and to go. And so all of a sudden, you know, 3 months into 2020, COVID happened, and all of a sudden those 5 of those 10 top trends became like a reality. And so what you've seen, and obviously you guys are part of it, you've seen those restaurants shift to, how do I do in a scalable way, a great experience to go and carry out. And so I think we've been very fortunate as an industry to have that available for our restaurants, and you can see the restaurants pivoting, and we don't see that kind of going away. And if anything, that has also expanded some capacity to restaurants that maybe were on the higher end and had very limited capacity within their restaurants, have allowed them to expand and get out to a larger market, and do a broader service. And so I just wanted to point that out, because I know you guys are probably seeing that. And we've been fortunate being in the back of the house versus the front of the house, which was obviously really impacted by in-house dining being limited. So I just saw another one come through, another question. And I think this kind of goes into to what we were talking about before of, you know, what different skills will employers expect from the new employee, right? The new expanded. And I think we all are probably saying more, we want to do more with less, or I think that's the question behind the question. So they're asking, what additional responsibilities do you see that they may need to have or be ready to have, that they may get that they wouldn't otherwise? There'd be maybe 2 people doing the job now for one. You know, it's like, congratulations, you're hired. Perhaps maybe you're going to have an expanded role. And I think I heard you talk a little bit of pastry. So I don't know if you want to go into that one a little bit further.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that we're seeing that businesses are looking at really thoughtfully is, you know, where are the overlaps and opportunities for consolidation, and then, you know, how do they be transparent and upfront with what they require, you know, from that particular employee. And that could be potentially somebody who is a sous chef that all of a sudden now also needs to take on some additional prep work, or, you know, cover certain aspects of their role of another role that, you know, they otherwise would have had somebody else be there. I think that's, you know, certainly something that we're seeing, and employers, you know, should be upfront about that, because I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of different creative ways that both businesses and talent can really position themselves throughout this process. I think it's very fair for you all, when you're talking with businesses, if you are going to you know, go into a role that might be expanded or is evolving, you know, just ask them to be very clear about it, because some things that a lot of businesses are also looking at, you know, how do they get past this next phase, and then what does it look like after, you know, with the goal of recovery in as fast of a pace as possible. You know, you want to be part of that team and part of the growth to help them through that, and it's a great learning experience as well. So there is also that pastry. That was a comment actually we read from a lot of comments from pastry folks who had proactively said, you know, I know businesses may not be hiring full-time, you know, executive pastry chefs or pastry sous. So, you know, considering upskilling, cross-skilling, and then vice versa on the savory side. front of house is a little bit more, people have spoken about wine positions in certain instances not being something that businesses, will and can bring back right away. And I've also spoken with back of house folks who have always had a desire to, cross skill with a beverage or wine for pairings, et cetera, to enhance their own skills as well. So any of those things that you can bring to the table that are different and unique are absolutely worth highlighting in your interview, or perhaps even in your cover letter that's very succinct. And I know you have all the professionals to give you all of those pieces of advice as you're preparing for those as well.
Well, I know we were talking about, during this time where if you're in between jobs and you're going to school or you're looking to kind of better yourself, this is the time to kind of take in all the resources that are available to you. You're in charge of creating your personal brand. And so if you have all these skills, how are you going to put that down on paper and to present yourself so that your future employer knows that you perhaps have bilingual skills, you know a little bit about wine, you've done pastry as well as done culinary. So as we all package that up and kind of craft your story and your narrative when you go into those interviews is going to be very important. So I personally encourage you guys to work directly with your career services assistants and make sure that we're developing that story in your personal brand so that you're making the best impression as you go out there. So I have another question about younger or older people. So this is a career changer question. So as you see people, are you, what kind of advice would you give someone who's doing career changing and just entering into the industry for the first time? And are you seeing more younger or older people enter the industry? And then what about career changers, I think is what the person was asking.
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about this industry is that it's very diverse, both from a generational standpoint as well as, ethnicities and interests, et cetera. So, while I can't speak to any specific thing about, older or younger, et cetera, I think what we have seen that is common is the attitude that the person brings. Depending on what career you're changing from, I think as long as your expectation is of the mindset of, you're gonna work just as hard, if not harder, as everybody else who is in that position or wants that position. I think from an employer standpoint, a lot of times, they're looking for the can-do attitude and the passion and the reliability and the ability. They're not looking at age. I mean, they shouldn't. They that's not something that I've seen employers actually mindfully do. It's always been a focus of, is this person qualified? Do they have the potential? Do they have the right attitude? And do they have the basic skills that, quite frankly, I can teach from, right? And help them do on the job learning on top of the foundation that they've already acquired through their education. And if the answer is no to those things, it doesn't matter if you're a career changer or if you're young or older. It's a matter of, is this person a right fit to my culture, to what I need for my team?
Mm-hmm. And I would say it's also based on experience. And so I think we naturally maybe think that young maybe doesn't have experience, old has experience, but that's not the reality, right? And you could have varied experience, and it's probably more on that. And to your point, the willingness to do a great job and to have a great attitude. So this person's asking, and I know it's probably different now. How long does it typically typically take to fill a job? And I'm not sure if there was going to be a general question or general answer with that one. And then I thought this was a great one. Are employers using Zoom? So are we starting to see where they're doing initial interviews over Zoom and then bringing someone in for a final interview? So I feel like we've become the Zoom world. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So to the first part of the question, it depends as far as how long it takes to fill a position. I will say that, you know, depending on the business and depending on, you know, how many resources they have. Because the reality is a lot of independent restaurants or smaller businesses, they don't have a dedicated HR person or a talent acquisition person. It's the, you know, executive chef or the owner or the GM who's the one that has to also reply to the emails, set up the trails, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I think it depends on how urgently that particular business needs to bring somebody on board. And it also depends on, you know, how the communication and the responsiveness happens. It's always a kind of a two-way street. And we get to see both sides, where sometimes employers are a little slow to respond and the talent is like, you know, why has this person taken a day or two or whatever to respond to me? And then vice versa, where, you know, the employer is responding, but the talent, you know, might be on a different trail or got a different job and didn't tell them. So, you know, I think collectively, I always encourage everyone to just, you know, close the loop and be responsive, because, you know, you're going to lose that candidate or you're going to lose that, you know, business if you're dragging your feet, especially at a time like this. So it depends as far as how long it takes. And then to the second part of the question, what was that again? Sorry.
I think it was just, are they using Zoom?
Oh,
as
yes.
are they as a recruitment tool?
So we are seeing businesses start to use, you know, whether it be Zoom or Google Meet. Especially now, they've been much more open to doing that for phone screens or for initial, you know, interviews. Because they can't call you in to see you. So we are seeing more of that. One of our hints and tips on one of our resources is, you know, practice a little bit, get used to, you know, the, you know, what your Zoom or what your Google Meet or FaceTime would look like. Find a quiet place. It doesn't hurt. It's good practice anyway. You know, that way, if a business says, yes, you know, let's do a Zoom or let's, you know, here's a link, you're already prepared. You have the software downloaded, which you do because we're all on Zoom right now. But, you know, you have the space and you know that you're not in a noisy part of, you know, where you would take the call.
And as you can see, we have some virtual backgrounds that some of our students are using. And so they use Zoom within their classroom. So at least that technology is readily available, and they've been watching and using it throughout their schooling. So this one's an interesting one, and we have had a little bit of discussion on it. Personal and private chef openings. You know, let's say a patron is not so excited about going back into the restaurant dining, and so I think we're seeing some. I know we have a personal private chef who had done a book and written a book on the industry, and she sits on one of our industry boards, and so she's super excited about what's going on in the industry in terms of promoting that private personal chef. But are you guys seeing that as well, with some people trying to do that as part of a job reentry?
Yeah, I think you know, the great thing is we've seen all sorts of creative again, opportunities. I think a lot of people have used this time to try out something that they've been wanting to do, or give something a shot that they otherwise wouldn't have because they didn't have time, or they were, you know, doing something else. So we have seen a couple of things in the personal chef space that's pretty interesting. One is, of course, the traditional, like you work for a particular family or you're dedicated to. I think during this time we have seen, you know, people be you know, if they're going somewhere, like if they're getting out of a particular city or they're going somewhere, they want to bring that person with them. It's a much more dedicated, you know, situation versus, you know, just coming into their household. There are services that have, you know, emerged, I would say, over the past year, where there's actually like agencies that are curating specific personal chefs, so that they're actually helping you book opportunities. You're not necessarily working for one family or one place. You're actually able to, you know, highlight your skills and your expertise, and then the agency actually places you based upon the requests that they get. So that's another thing in the realm of personal private chefing. And then, you know, related to, but not really, but kind of related to, we see a lot of more of kind of the prepared meal kit service doing well that are, there are a couple of new ones I think that recently emerged, but some that are more specific around, you know, eating healthy or different diets, or like order, you know, prepared meals from, you know, a Michelin-starred chef or something. So there are different services and opportunities that are emerging that I think will be here to stay. They're not just because, you know, of the current situation.
Well, I think that that's one of the ways we've seen some of these finer dining restaurants pivot and shift during COVID, is they're doing, you know, prepared meals, takeout, and more upscale, but and maybe in a more affordable way and more scalable, which has been really interesting to see. I know we're seeing that out of the Chicago area. So, well, I mean, we're almost coming up to our time. Great questions. Thank you, Alice, for the dialogue, the insight. It's great partnering with you and having access into the industry and providing great opportunities for our students and alumni. Any closing comments that you have for our folks on today?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say there are so many opportunities. You all are so well positioned. I'm very excited for what's to come. And just know that Culinary Agents, you know, in partnership with Escoffier, we're here to serve all of you. Our goal is, how do we continue to make the technology work for you, easy to use, but then at the end of the day, you know, make it easy for you to connect with employers and to find information and to communicate and find resources. So check out the site if you have not and you're not familiar. It's free to talent. We have a whole resource section that we also curate. And then you can also send feedback to us at info@culinaryagents.com, where we're constantly gathering ideas and topics that people are writing in about, so that we can go do those research and quite frankly, curate the content so that it's relevant to all of you.
I will just finish by echoing what Alice was saying in terms of, we're here to service you guys. We want to make sure that you're prepared to be in the industry, prepared to re-enter the industry. So Patricia and the Career Services team is here for you. I know you guys already reached out to your faculty, and glad you do that, and your student coaches. And so let us know if there's anything that we can do. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy Thursday afternoon. And it was great seeing everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.